They are evil people for what they did.
She described Gabriel as a kind and helpful boy.
The following stories tell the tale of young people who had their whole lives ahead of them, but got very unlucky on their trips across the planet. Although today's case takes place in Tokyo, Japan, I'm going to begin my story in the small town of Coventry in the UK. Coventry is known for its horrific destruction during World War II, but also for its amazing bounce back over the last few decades. It's a modern place connected to all the big cities in the country and home to many cultural institutions. Coventry was also the home of Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay was born on December 30th, 1984 to Bill and Julia. She grew up with her parents and two sisters, Lisa and Louise. The three sisters were very close, even after Lindsay left to study biology in Leeds. After she graduated with a first degree class in 2006, Lindsay decided to do something special before starting her master's degree. Lindsay had been an admirer of Japanese culture for pretty much her whole life. Looking at opportunities to travel there, she found a program to teach English at the Nova Language School in Tokyo. Nova was a very prestigious school, and Lindsay was one of the lucky few to make it to the school in Tokyo. The school was located in Koya, a very hip neighborhood full of fun activities, parks, and clubs. But Lindsay moved to an apartment in Chiba, a more affordable area in eastern Tokyo. Lindsay quickly became good friends with her flatmates, an Australian and a Canadian teacher. But she never forgot her home. She was in close contact with her family and with her boyfriend of 4 years. He was bound to come visit her in the summer, and the two were saving up to go traveling around the world after her year in Tokyo. Tragically, none of this was ever going to happen. Lindsay's time in Japan was about to run out. On March 20th, 2007, Lindsay got off the train at the Chiba station and went to unlock her bike.
As she was unlocking her bike, a man approached her from behind. When she turned around, the man greeted her by saying, "You are my English teacher."
Lindsay did teach adults, but she knew this wasn't one of her students. This was Tatsuya Ichiashi, a 28-year-old man who grew up in the Chiba neighborhood. Tatsuya's mother was a dentist and his father was a doctor. He was a horticulture graduate and had always been a studious person, but he was a true social outcast. In Tokyo, these people are called hikikomori, people with extreme isolation from society. His parents gave him more than enough to condone his laziness. In fact, Tatsuya could afford to live in a 3-bedroom apartment, which is a very big deal in Tokyo. Still, he wasn't pleased with his life, and he even stole to get by sometimes. In 2005, Tatsuya tried to steal a woman's belongings and ended up assaulting her in the process. However, the case was settled outside of the court, with his dad paying off the woman to stay quiet. It doesn't seem like Tatsuya's parents were encouraging him to behave better. In fact, it seems like they were covering for his misbehavior and throwing money at him and anyone he'd hurt. Tatsuya was in a fairly stable relationship with a woman he had been dating for a year or so. According to her, he was obsessed with violent adult cartoons. Also, he was often gone for many hours every day, sometimes cycling 15 miles in one day. Apparently, Tatsuya was obsessed with his body, and his obsession would get much worse, as would his mental health. In early 2007, Tatsuya claimed his mental health was declining, but no one really knew what that meant, and he never went to get help. Unfortunately, this was about to have horrifying consequences. Skip to March 20th, 2007. Tatsuya approached Lindsay and lied to her about being her English student. She knew this was wrong and told him he must be wrong. He then switched his story and asked her to be his teacher. Lindsay felt this was getting weird, so she ignored him and got on her bike. But Tatsuya had planned this thoroughly, and he wasn't going to let Lindsay go. Tatsuya followed Lindsay on foot. As she cycled faster, he started running after her. When she stopped the bike in front of her apartment, Tatsuya was there. Panting and gasping for air, he asked her if he could have a glass of water. For some reason, Lindsay felt sorry for him and invited him upstairs. Lindsay had 2 roommates, and she figured inviting Tatsuya in was a way of showing him she didn't live alone, and a way to show her roommate his face, in case something happened. Tatsuya had a glass of water, then quickly sketched something on a piece of paper. Then, he handed it to Lindsay. It was a sketch of her face, his name, and phone number. Once again, Tatsuya asked Lindsay if she was willing to offer him English lessons. He would pay very well, and they could meet in a public place like a cafe. He insisted. However, Lindsay was reluctant and told Tatsuya she would think about it. Then Tatsuya made her a real offer, $32 an hour. Lindsay couldn't say no to this. This was a lot of money, and she did want to save up as fast as she could. On March 24th, 2007, Lindsay was about to meet Tatsuya at a local cafe for their first English lesson. Every time Lindsay would take a few steps back, Tatsuya would come closer to her. After they sat down, Lindsay gave her English lesson, and it seemed like everything went well. But at the end, Tatsuya told Lindsay he'd forgotten his money.
No worries, he said. I only live half a mile down the road. Why don't you come by and grab your money, and then be on your way?
This seemed like a reasonable scenario for Lindsay, so she agreed to share a cab with Tatsuya to his place. When they got to his place, Lindsay asked the taxi driver if he could wait for her. She had to get to work later that day, and she didn't want to be late. So Lindsay went upstairs with Tatsuya, but as the taxi driver waited for her, he realized she wasn't coming back. 7 minutes later, the taxi driver left. But the truth was much darker than a simple change of plan. Tatsuya R-worded and murdered Lindsay in his apartment. When Lindsay failed to show up at work that afternoon, the school notified her flatmates. They got even more worried when Lindsay never came home to the party they were supposed to attend together that evening. By Monday, 2 days after her disappearance, Lindsay's family was getting beyond worried. They were always in contact through Skype, email, and constant phone calls. 2 days of radio silence were a bad sign. On Monday, March 26th, the police started an investigation for the disappearance of Lindsay Hawker. It was pretty easy to connect the dots. Lindsay's roommates gave the police the sketch Tatsuya had given Lindsay. It had his name and phone number on it. So the police hurried to Tatsuya's house. But in Japan, you can't just barge into someone's apartment without a clear reason. But soon enough, the police saw Tatsuya hurry out of his home as he realized the officers were standing outside. He'd left barefoot, holding a small backpack. When the police confronted him, he started running. There were 9 officers in his building spread out between the 4th floor and the ground floor, but they had no walkie-talkies, so when Tatsuya evaded the 4th floor officers, they couldn't alert the ones downstairs. The police lost Tatsuya that day. Tatsuya evaded the police for almost 3 years. It was about to be one of Japan's longest and toughest manhunts. When the police went inside Tatsuya's flat, they found a scene that would mark them forever. He had moved his detachable bathtub into his balcony, and the tub was filled with sand. Inside the tub was the naked, gagged, and tied body of Lindsay. She had bruises as big as eggs all over her body and face, and she had been assayed. According to the coroner, she had died of asphyxiation as Tatsuya grabbed her neck to keep her from screaming. Even creepier, Tatsuya had shaved Lindsay's head and kept her hair in the flat. The police also found multiple wigs inside the place. As soon as the police left the crime scene, they started a nationwide hunt for Tatsuya. His picture was shown across the country, and the police even showed a picture of how Tatsuya would look if he would disguise himself as a woman. Tatsuya would indeed disguise himself, but in a much more gruesome way. He cut his face several times in order to avoid getting recognized. First, Tatsuya embarked on a pilgrimage of temples on the southwestern island of Shikoku. He wrote in his diary, "I wish Lindsay would come back to life." This idea was drawn from a novel where the dead are resurrected after their loved ones think of them inside of a temple. Tatsuya continued to travel by train and bus, anywhere the road would take him. When he noticed wanted posters across the country, he decided to slice off the moles on his left cheek, which were visible in the posters. Throughout 2007 and 2008, He worked on construction sites in Osaka and wore surgical masks to cover his scars as well as his identity. All the money he'd save, he would spend on plastic surgery. He made his nose longer, narrower, and lifted its bridge. He changed the shape of his eyebrows, eyes, and mouth, some through doctors, some by himself with a knife. As weeks turned into months and Tatsuya continued to evade the police, Lindsay's family was angrier and angrier. They were worried that the Tokyo Police Department was getting lazy and giving up on the case. So, in the summer of 2007, Lindsay's parents arrived in Tokyo and started raising awareness for their daughter's case. Lindsay's dad, Bill, even met up with members of the Yakuza Mafia. He gifted them 2 bottles of whiskey and asked for their help to find Tatsuya. As Lindsay's family drew attention to the incompetence of the police officers on the case, the UK media got involved too. This was when the Japanese police raised the reward for any information leading to Tatsuya's arrest from 1 million to 10 million yen, over $120,000. In late 2009, a plastic surgery clinic noticed that Tatsuya had removed moles from his left cheek. They reported his visit and sent photos to the police. The photos were shown by the media across the country. Tatsuya knew this would be the end for him. He immediately checked out of his hotel, got a haircut, and even bought a party disguise set containing a beard, sideburns, and a mustache. But the police and the whole of Japan now had before and after pictures of Tatsuya, taken at another plastic surgery clinic. One of his construction worker colleagues recognized Tatsuya from the picture and called the police. The police finally stopped Tatsuya on November 10th, 2009, at the ferry terminal in Osaka. Tatsuya wanted to escape to the Okinawa island, where he would lay low in one of the abandoned bunkers there. But a ferry worker recognized him at the port and immediately notified security. When the police had him surrounded, Tatsuya admitted to his name and to his crime. Tatsuya Ichiachi was charged with the murder, and abandoning of the body of Lindsay in his flat. However, it would take many more months for him to finally meet his jury. Tatsuya's trial began on July 4th, 2011. The case was very publicized, and people around both Japan and the UK urged the judge to give Tatsuya the death penalty. Leading this crowd was Lindsay's family. They had lost their lives as they knew them, and were spending every day trying to get justice for Lindsay. However, Japan very rarely gives the death penalty to single murder cases. On July 21st, 2011, more than 4 years after this horrific crime, Tatsuya was sentenced to life in prison. Some justice had been brought for Lindsay, but her family was even more devastated than before the trial. After the trial was over, Lindsay's family released a heartbreaking statement to the media.
We've worked tirelessly as a family. We've never given in for our daughter. We've never given in. We wanted justice, and we've finally got justice.
People close to Lindsay's family started speaking up for them and the tragedy they went through. Just before his trial, Tatsuya wrote and published a memoir about his crime and years spent running away from the police. It's called Until I Was Arrested. He describes how he became obsessed with altering his face and how he wished Lindsay could just come back to life. In the book, he also apologizes to the Hawker family. He wanted to give all the profits from this book to Lindsay's family, and over 100,000 copies were sold. However, the Hawker family refused the offer. They are deeply upset about everything surrounding Tatsuya, and they said a book on Lindsay is an insult to her memory. Needless to say, they want to distance themselves from his world as much as possible. But Lindsay's family knew how to separate the murderer from the rest of the country. Bill Hawker expressed his gratitude to the people of Japan for helping with Lindsay's case. Lindsay won't be remembered as a story in her killer's book. She'll be remembered as the smart, curious, and adventurous girl who went to Tokyo and gifted each and every one of her students a bag of lavender as a gesture of her goodwill. The next story takes us all the way to the Netherlands. This was the home of Lisanne Froon and Chris Kremers. They were best friends, students at the same university, and roommates. They had met in Amsterdam while working at the same restaurant, and they immediately became besties. Lisanne was a friendly, optimistic person and a passionate volleyball player. Chris was described as creative, open-minded, and responsible. Lisanne had just graduated with a degree in applied sciences in September 2013, and Chris was studying for a degree in cultural social education. Together, they saved up for 6 months for a trip to Panama as a graduation celebration for Lisanne. On March 15, 2014, 22-year-old Lisanne and 21-year-old Chris arrived in Panama for a 6-week vacation, 4 of which were to be spent living with a host family while they worked as volunteers in Boquita, teaching local children in the school and learning Spanish. So they decided to take time to explore the area around Boquita while they waited for their job to start. First, it seemed like paradise. There was nothing but sun, sea, and amazing food to enjoy for a whole week. Lisanne and Chris also met some Dutch men who were also vacationing in the area, and they shared some activities for a couple days. On April 1st, Lisanne and Chris decided to go hiking on a local trail called La Pinista. What could go wrong, right? Tragically, everything would go wrong for Lisanne and Chris. This was a 5 to 6 hour hike of moderate difficulty in warm weather. The girls left in shorts and tank tops, carrying just a light backpack with water, their phones, wallets, and passports. Lisanne and Chris took a lot of photos of the trail and of each other on the way to the summit. They reached the top in 2 hours. So, around 1 p.m. This was when the girls were supposed to start walking down the same way they came. This is what the signs in the area encourage tourists to do anyways. But something made Lisanne and Chris choose the hard way and hike down a forbidden trail through shrubland. Soon enough, both were dead, but the circumstances of their death would point towards a much darker, much creepier cause than falling off a cliff. When the girls didn't return home that night, the host family thought it was a bit strange, but didn't take it too seriously. They were 2 adults after all. Perhaps they had met some other tourists and crashed at their place. But on April 3rd, 2 days after their disappearance, the family reported them missing to the police. But for some reason, the police didn't take this seriously at all. In fact, the first search for the girls was conducted by volunteers and locals who know the area. By April 5th, Lisanne and Chris's families arrived in Panama as well. They were worried sick and outraged that the police were barely visible on the case. They took matters into their own hands and participated in the search all around the hiking trail. Soon enough, they made a poster to distribute it all around the Boquita area. They also offered $30,000 for any relevant information. Lisanne and Chris's parents kept searching for their daughters every day, but to no avail. They were getting desperate and slowly starting to embrace the worst scenario.
Het is ons wel duidelijk eigenlijk.
Nou ja, wij geloven niet dat ze van het pad af is gegaan. Dat geloven we echt niet.
Nee. Nee, precies. Zo stom is ze niet.
Zo stom is ze niet. En je moet hier echt moeite doen om te gaan verdwalen. En dat gaan ze echt niet doen.
Nee.
Als ze wat gebroken zouden hebben, zouden ze zeker ook...
She's right. The hiking trail is a very easy one. So easy, it's nearly impossible to get lost. And neither Lisanne nor Chris were head in the clouds type. So what if they got injured?
Ja, er zijn ook langs het pad geen steile hellingen of ravijnen waar je in kan donderen en daar dan niet meer gezien wordt.
The parents had now seen for themselves that this was not a trail where any of these scenarios would have been possible. This, along with the police's reluctance to take over the case, sent out some serious red flags to the very worried families. But the case went cold, and the families couldn't stay on the trail forever. 2 months later, though, a local woman found Lisanne's backpack containing the girls' mobile phones, sunglasses, and bras. It was floating in a river near the Costa Rica border. Everything inside the backpack was neatly folded and in perfect condition. This was another red flag. How did this backpack survive for 2 months in that extremely humid weather without getting damaged at all? And to add to the creepiness of it all, There were several sets of fingerprints found on the backpack, but they were never followed up as the police didn't have a fingerprint database. However, the police would find many other relevant clues in this backpack, more precisely, through the girls' phones and camera. This is their call history from April 1st to 11th. Just a few hours into their trip, something went terribly wrong. The girls dialed 112, the European Emergency Services, as early as 4 p.m. on their first day in the mountains. Then they kept switching off their phones and turning them on again, and trying to dial 911 or 112, so as not to lose the battery. But the calls never went through, as there was no signal in the area. As the records clearly show, the girls repeatedly turned their phones to check for signal, but there was no success. Finally, and most worrying, on April 6th, someone started trying to access Chris's phone. Then the attempts stopped. There's one more. There are about 100 pictures taken from April 1st onwards on Lisanne's camera, but just about 10 show the girls hiking or posing during the daytime. The other 90 pictures were all taken on April 8th between 1 and 4 a.m., and 87 of them show nothing but blackness. The very last picture on the camera shows a rock formation, either a sort of natural trail or the end of a cliff. But that's not the strange part. This picture, and all the other dark ones, were taken a whole week after the start of the trail. Remember, the girls left home with just a bottle of water. It's highly unlikely that they were still alive on April 9th. There is also a very strange image in this series, a picture of Chris's head, which seems to show an injury and blood on her hair. Finally, there's another disturbing clue on the camera. One of the pictures was deleted, the image numbered 509. The creepiest part is that this image was exactly the gap between the daytime photos showing the girls and the mysterious nighttime photos. This person went to great lengths to conceal his crime. First, he followed the girls, who tried to dial emergency numbers to escape them. Then, they supposedly killed the girls, taking an incriminating photo in the process. Then, they took their backpack, deleted the image with a computer, then proceeded to take several nighttime pictures through the jungle. Finally, they placed the camera back in the backpack and threw it in a river? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So there's a few things that don't add up here. First of all, Chris's PIN was never entered correctly after April 5th. Second of all, the girls' camera took pictures, including one of Chris's head, on April 8th. Say Lisanne had tried to enter the PIN on Chris's phone, but Chris wouldn't have concealed her PIN from Lisanne unless she was unconscious or dead. As the police were finally starting to look into foul play, they found a tragic piece of evidence. On June 19th, a local guide found Lisanne's boot with her foot still in it. Over the following week, 33 more bones would be discovered around the same area, some 8 hours of walking from the summit. These included Lisanne's rib and Chris's pelvis, and the findings would only get nastier. On August 29th, a rolled up bit of Lisanne's skin was found, almost in pristine condition. Her bones and bone marrow were also in the first stages of decomposition. If that's not foul play, I don't know what is. The police initially ruled the girls' case as death by abduction, but when forensic teams failed to reach a conclusion, the case switched to accidental death and closed. The girls' families were left devastated and forever frustrated at the lack of a conclusion from the police. They never searched for a killer. Our last story begins on a remote island called Koh Tao in Thailand. It is only reachable by boat, but over the last decade, it's become increasingly popular with young tourists from all over the globe.
It's magical when you first arrive. Everything is perfect, and because the contrast between the way we're kind of policed in Europe and everything's controlled, when you arrive in Thailand, you feel like you can do what you like.
This was precisely what made Hannah Witheridge come to Koh Tao in September 2014. She was just 23 years old and just taking a break from her post-grad studies. Her parents tried to convince her not to go to Thailand, at least not on her own. But one day, she just booked the tickets and left. After all, she was a grown woman, and the island was known for being very open to English-speaking tourists. Around the same time, 24-year-old David Miller left the UK for Koh Tao as well. He was just about to start a scholarship with a mining company, and he wanted a huge holiday before this. He took his best friends with him and headed for the sunny beaches in Koh Tao. Well, the sunny beaches and all the late-night parties David loved. That's where Hannah and David met. They were two young Brits staying at the same hotel, enjoying the beach. On September 14th, 2014, Hannah and David met with David's friends and had a few drinks at a beach bar. After midnight, they split up, Hannah meeting some other friends, and David going to a supermarket and then returning to his friends. Around 2 a.m., David joined Hannah once more. They got some quick drinks at another beach bar, then went to take a walk on the beach by themselves. They were never seen alive again. The next morning, shortly after sunrise, the owner of the hotel Hannah and David were staying at was woken up and taken to the beach.
ที่ทำความสะอาดร้านอาหารอยู่ลูกน้องพี่ก็ตกใจวิ่งไปหาพี่บนห้องไปเคาะประตูเรียกพี่ก็ลงมากับพวกลูกน้อง
The scene was a gruesome one. There was blood everywhere, and Hannah and David's bodies were floating in the very shallow water. Both of them had suffered extreme violent hits to their head, and Hannah had been raped. Not far from the scene was the garden hoe covered in blood. News spread very quickly, and the police were notified. But there were only 6 police officers on the whole island, and they'd never seen anything quite as violent as this.
รู้สึกของความเป็นคนนะก็ตกใจเหมือนกันแต่ด้วยความที่เราเป็นตำรวจคือมันค่อนข้างที่จะไม่ได้ถึงขั้นจะไปนั่งช็อกอะไรแต่ความรู้สึกก็คือมันหดหู่ครับ
Not only were the police unprepared in finding a murderer, but they also weren't able to control the crowd. The crime scene was immediately tainted by tourists and locals taking pictures of the bodies and posting them on social media. Soon enough, this drew the attention of the Bangkok police.
Some confidential material that leak out is really bad, especially the photos of the victims on the crime scene, and that the traumatized the family, the victim's family. Once I have talked to David's father on the phone, I said sorry to him.
The National Police took over the investigation and collected DNA samples from the garden hoe and the cigarette butts found on the beach. The results came in 2 Asian men, but they weren't in their database, so it was a needle in a haystack type of situation. The police proceeded to collect swabs from as many Asian men as possible. When the police were doing a lot of work with no apparent results, rumors started circulating. Most of these rumors concerned the Thai island mafia, powerful families with control over the land and the people that worked on the land. The central focus on social media was on one particular mafia family who owned almost all the businesses on the Sierra Beach, where David and Hannah stayed, met, drank, and died together. As the hotel owner was seen to be very close to the police throughout the investigation, rumors started that this family controlled the owner, who tampered with the investigation.
ไม่ว่าพี่ไปจับต้องอะไรด้วยใช่ไหมไม่ก็ไม่เห็นจะผิดอะไรเพราะว่าเป็นระดับผู้กำกับเขาบินลงมาไอ้เขามากับเครื่องไอ้เขามากับโรงพยาบาลมาที่เกาะเต่าแล้วเขาก็ถามหาพี่เป็นคนแรกเขาถามหาคนที่เห็นศพเป็นคนแรก
As the police were failing to match the DNA samples to anyone, they turned their eyes onto the Western tourists in the area. Soon enough, the center of their focus was Sean McGanna, another British tourist who had shared the hotel room with David. Apparently, someone had spotted Sean covered in blood, and the police were now treating it as a crime of passion. They chased Sean into a supermarket and threatened him. Sean became increasingly afraid of the police and the Thai mafia, He was innocent and had no idea what was going on. He posted on his Facebook page, "Thai mafia are trying to kill me." Before fleeing the country, he spoke to the British press in the country.
Then they just said to me, it was you who killed them. You've got 2 people's deaths in your hands. We know it was you.
Luckily, Sean managed to fly out of Thailand, and soon enough, the police returned to their DNA samples. They might not have liked it, but they did belong to 2 Asian men. Finally, the answer lied in the CCTV footage on the island. The police found a recording of 3 men riding a motorbike to a 7-Eleven, where they bought a beer and cigarettes before going to the Sierra Beach. One of the men took a shortcut near the crime scene. This was Mao Mao, a local Burmese resident. So, on October 1st, 2 weeks after the murders, the police interrogated Mao Mao. He said he took a motorbike and split up from the other 2 men before the murders. Then he found them at home asleep when he got back. The next day, the Thai police entered the men's home and interrogated Zaw Lin, a 22-year-old illegal migrant worker from Myanmar. He was arrested for this and on suspicion of murder. The other murderer, Wai Phao, was found hiding out on a boat later that night. He was also 22, and he had come from Myanmar with Zaw Lin. Zaw and Wai were interrogated for hours with Burmese interpreters, and finally, they confessed to the murder of Hannah and David. Apparently, they had become aroused when they saw Hannah and David kissing on the beach, so they wanted to violate her. When they were done, they didn't want any witnesses, so they killed both and left them on the beach. But not everyone was satisfied with the conclusion. Burmese migrants had a history of mistreatment by the Thai authorities, and people were worried that Zaw and Wai were victims, not the actual killers. In fact, after a consular lawyer visited them from Myanmar, Zaw and Wai retracted their confessions, saying they had made these statements under pressure after the police beat them and left them naked. The chief police officer denied any allegation of police torture. Both Zaw and Wai had confessed to the murders. Wai had even reenacted the murder. Finally, their DNA swabs were taken, and they did indeed match the samples found at the crime scene.
We found inside the body, we found at the cigarette. So maybe that's enough for us.
And if that wasn't enough, the police found David's phone in Zaw's room. On Christmas Eve 2015, Zaw and Wai were convicted of the murder and sentenced to death. However, in 2020, a royal decree turned the death sentences to life in prison. While there was some closure brought to Hannah and David's families, the events on Koh Tao Island will haunt them forever. It was supposed to be an idyllic holiday. Instead, it turned into their worst nightmare. Thanks for watching, you guys. Hey, don't be shy. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. See you next time, and stay safe out there.